Hey everybody, welcome back. So sorry I haven't been posting too many videos lately about programming. I've just been really busy on other projects. But today I'm going to go on a little bit of a JavaScript ecosystem rant. So a few weeks ago I posted a video where I talked about how there was a breaking change in ES build that kind of messed up the JavaScript end of my Rails front end program. The ES build is it's built in JavaScript, and I was talking about how a lot of these open source projects in the JavaScript community now, they just roll out breaking changes that break all the dependencies in your software, and that could become very expensive to maintain. So in one of the projects I'm working on right now, it originally was a warehouse inventory application that was written with a backend in Java, not JavaScript, the Java Spring Boot framework as a backend, which is similar to Rails, but not as good. And it had a front end that was HTML, and for the JavaScript part of it, it was using AngularJS. Not the modern Angular that you have today. I'm talking about like Angular from back in 2015, AngularJS version 1 of that framework. Since then, they came out with an Angular version 2, they modernized it and it was completely different. So this program, the back end, it still kind of works, but the front end was really messy and unmaintainable because there was a lot of complex business logic inside of this warehouse application, a lot of richness in the front end user interface, things like with big data tables and sorting them out and stuff like that, and menus and calendar components and stuff like that. And the problem is that the way that Angular is designed, it was just plain vanilla JavaScript using the old style functions, and it was kind of a spaghetti code thing, and it was really difficult for newer programs to maintain because the guy who originally developed this program, he moved on to other things, and he wasn't working on it anymore. So they had to bring in a new team, which is me, to work on this project. And the shape of that code was so bad, and because that version 1 of Angular was deprecated, we decided to say, we're just going to rebuild this whole darn application. The Java code was kind of difficult to maintain too. It was really cumbersome to do stuff that we wanted to do in the back end, so we're rewriting that in Rails as a Rails API thing. But and that went really smoothly. I kind of led that piece of the redesign of this application. But the front end part, which is connecting to the Rails API now, that we chose to do in Vue, and at the time that we started the project, it was Vue version 2. So now, a couple of years later, this front end is kind of difficult to work with, and I think one of the big problems, one of the things that makes it very difficult is that the Vue framework itself is changing and evolving as we're working on this application. So we can't really get this thing ever done for the client because we do one build out of the code and update, modernize one part of the user interface, and then we start working on the next part. But in the months that gone by where we were working on part 2, part 1 of that front end is already outdated, and it has dependencies that need to be upgraded. So this morning, one of the problems we had was with this calendar component. The calendar component wasn't doing everything. It didn't have all the things that we needed to do. There was like a date setting feature that needed to be changed, and we couldn't do it with the base calendar component that shipped with Vue version 2. We considered, let's just make a pull request and add that feature to the open source project. But the problem is that calendar is already completely deprecated because now we have Vue version 3. And so then the discussion turned into, well, shit, we have half of this app in Vue version 2. Do we upgrade all of this code that we already wrote to the Vue version 3 syntax? Because that's a pretty darn big deal, and that takes a lot of effort. It takes time, it takes money, and a client has to pay for that stuff. So that's the thing that really annoys me about the JavaScript ecosystem, is the rate that things get deprecated nowadays. You look at a React app today, it's completely different from a React app of 5 years ago. Like, just the coding technique has changed, and supposedly the way that they do things now is better. You know, like, Create React app is now dead, and they're using other build tools and stuff. I don't know, maybe things are getting better, but it's really costly to upgrade that stuff. And if you don't upgrade your JavaScript, you can't build out anything new with it. And that's a really frustrating problem, I think, in the whole programming community right now. One of the things I think has driven this reckless deprecation of older code is the economy. So right now, the Fed has interest rates rising up there. There's a lot of talk about it having an effect on the cost of capital. And when you think about it, you look back at the last 10 to 14 years where we've had very loose monetary policy at a macro level. There were 0% interest rates, negative interest rates in some way, and you had quantitative easing going on in the economy. There was money printing like crazy. Where did all this money go? Well, I think a lot of it went to Silicon Valley tech. And you had some very high valuations in stock prices. You had a lot of VC money going around to fund ideas. And as a result, there were a lot of programmers hired. A lot of developers had jobs, I think, because of the loose monetary policy. Because, you know, a lot of these companies, they're not profitable, but they could run losses for a very long time because they could keep getting investor money. Gosh, I'm sweating a lot in this car. It is finally getting really hot out. But okay, so I think what's happened is you had the Netflixes of the world with lots of resources to hire engineers, and you had huge teams of JavaScript developers writing, I guess you could say, maybe a bit inefficiently, because I don't consider Vue to be a very efficient system. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of tediousness to get something done, because you're juggling all these darn dependencies and structure and stuff like that. Basically, a lot of manual labor went into the JavaScript ecosystem because companies were able to hire armies of developers to write elaborate JavaScript front ends. And I mean, when I look at how the industry's changed over the past 10 years or so, when I started doing Rails, there was something called a full stack developer. And that meant that you are a developer who could write the back end of a website, and you could write a functional front end. You could develop the whole website from the DevOps to the back end, to the database, to what the customer sees when they're in the shopping cart on the website itself. But not so much anymore, because now we've got these very expensive frameworks. Yeah, they're free to download and free to install on your computer and free to code in, but they're very expensive in that you got to have somebody to do that stuff and work with that software. And it's expensive in that it's very labor intensive to work with JavaScript and keep those dependencies up to date. So like what one Rails developer was able to do 10 years ago, now you need to have like a Rails guy and like 3 JavaScript developers. You know, on like this particular project I'm talking about, we have more front-end guys than we have back-end guys. And I think it's that with all of the capital going around Silicon Valley, companies could afford that. They could afford to have very large, bloated, inefficient frameworks. And I think that's one of the reasons that JavaScript is so difficult to work with and so cumbersome and has so many deprecations, because you've got so much manpower available that you can have a JavaScript specialist not just specializing in the front end, but some niche of the front end of this particular website, of these set of pages. You could have a specialist in this area of the front end of the website. They could afford to do that. But now the capital is getting pulled. The Fed's raising interest rates. There's going to be quantitative tightening. The rug is going to get pulled out from the VC firms, from the stock prices. Already we're seeing mass layoffs. Look at Microsoft. Look at, did Amazon do layoffs yet? I don't remember. A whole bunch of companies have done mass layoffs. They've reduced their workforce. Oh yeah, Salesforce. They've been reducing. There's been a purging across Silicon Valley. I mean, look at what Twitter's done. They went down to a skeleton crew of engineers. It will be interesting to see in the next 3 years what type of impact that has on open source, because companies aren't going to be able to afford to pay a whole bunch of guys to be dealing with deprecations like this anymore. The mindset's going to have to change. Companies are going to have to be a lot more nimble and efficient, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Anyway, that's some food for thought. I was just thinking about how I dislike JavaScript because it's so cumbersome to work with. It takes so much effort. I'm still working on another video where I'm going to be talking about why I switched from Vue to Stimulus. And a lot of it has to do with DHH's philosophy that when he's designing Rails and the ecosystem around Rails, the whole concept about Rails and why I like it so much is that it's empowering to a single Rails developer. You know, the Stimulus framework, Turbo, yeah, sure, it's not the fanciest system out there. So it may be a little bit scrappy in that it doesn't have as many like safeguards around it and stuff like that as you do with, like, if you're using TypeScript with React or whatever. There's less structure to it, but it provides you enough structure that you could actually get a lot done. And that's what I find so awesome about Ruby on Rails. I could run a whole website. Look at my website, USTreasuryyieldcurve.com, which I write exclusively. And I could do it because Rails is an awesome framework. And it's easy to learn, easy to maintain. It doesn't have as many huge deprecations that break lots of stuff. Now, I know, like, some people are going to say, oh, what about Rails 5 Webpack? Okay, yeah, okay, that was... But hey, the whole Webpacker stuff, that was driven by the JavaScript ecosystem. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see where things go if JavaScript gets better out of necessity because there's going to be less manpower and less capital floating around Silicon Valley. And companies, they ain't going to have time for that, dealing with breaking changes and deprecations. And I wonder if that's going to lead to a mindset shift in things. Anyway, if you thought this was an interesting topic, give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And I'll see you in the next video. Damn, it is, I'm sweating like a sauna in here. It is really hot. I guess the winter's over. See you later.